Health and wellness are more than a destination. They are a process and a journey of personal choice. Come hear from people out in the field, doing the work, bringing health and wellness to many. Welcome to the channel today. We're so excited to bring very important information to you today because everyone is affected by what we're going to talk about today, and that is stress. And I actually, when I was younger, I didn't even know what it was. And I think that's what happens. I think people don't really know what stress is until they start to have effects from too much of it. So what happened to me was I was a nurse. I was very much, unfortunately in America when I was working, and I think it's still probably the same, we worked a lot of shift work, which was, very intense and very long hours. And, I was young, so I could handle it. But after 10 years and my first baby, I started to feel the consequence. It didn't happen right away. It happened over time. And what did I notice? Oh my goodness. I started noticing, first of all, that I was very nervous. I started getting very anxious about the stupidest things. Like, really? Like going to the grocery store would stress me out. I mean, that's really crazy. But we can get stressed out about little things that are not really stressful. And those are signs that actually we're kind of stressed out. So in this situation I was in, I had a new baby. I still worked and I was exhausted. And I couldn't figure out what it was, but it had just been too much of demands on my body. So I started having even worse symptoms, panicky kind of feelings. And then I finally started investigating what was going on because as a nurse, you're not really in the hospital taught about wellness. That's unfortunate. It's not like doctors and nurses and physical therapists and social workers and all the people who help people in hospitals are trained in wellness. They're actually very much demanded a lot from, and I give them a lot of credit. I really have total respect for anyone in the medical field. It's a true sacrifice. But they're given a lot of demands on their body and their time and their emotions, and they're not actually always given tools how to handle it and how to be well. They're two different thoughts. So when I went to get help, I really was shocked to discover that according to the practitioner, and I went to an Ayurvedic doctor at the time, I was near a burnout. I couldn't believe it. And she explained it sort of like this to me. I said, what is it? And she said, well, stress is coming to people because of the demands on our physical, emotional, and mental state. And if we don't recognize it over time, the demands are so much that the system just starts to show symptoms. And some of the symptoms are exhaustion, headaches. Headaches are a big one. Pain all over the body. And she explained to me that you can actually have pain here in your shoulders, your neck, your upper arms, because you're holding yourself. Like after a while, you're just like this, you're sort of in a survival mode. So your bodies start to be constantly in a sort of rigid state. Now, we're going to get into some solutions, but obviously there are solutions when you're going to move your body in other ways. But a lot of times people are so busy and they're just working and surviving. And so they don't think of doing anything for themselves. And then their problems come. The other big thing that she explained to me at the time was that you can have digestive issues, that stress puts a huge load directly on your gut. And that's because there's a very, very strong connection between our brain and our gut. I like to compare our body and our brain to a computer. Think about your computer. When you overwhelm it, when you put too much data in it, when you start to add so many programs, what happens? It starts to slow down, right? But not only will it slow down, and I know it will crash. And that's what a burnout is. A burnout is when your body just crashes. One of the other things that we see with stress that's so individual is that we're all so unique and we all have different perceptions. If I were to ask a group of people to go in a room and to see something, they would all come back and tell me they saw something different. This is called perception. So because we're all so unique, we all have different perception of different things that are happening. And that's why we can never say one thing or one life event will be the exact same for everybody. That's not true. So what we've come to understand and what science is showing us is that we have characters, we have personalities. Some of us deal better with stress than others. Some of us are more aware of what's happening to us. We're more in contact with our body and our mind and our spirit. So we nourish ourselves better. But those who don't know yet how to nourish themselves, and they're really taking care of others, or they're just completely busy, like a lot of men and women who have big power jobs, they're just doing their best. They're going to work every day. And over time, they don't take the time to debrief, to declutter. And so over time, they become less creative. They become exhausted. They just see things in their life kind of stuck, not moving. And big events can really make it much worse. So then suddenly a big event happens, and then the person's completely out. And what kind of big events am I talking about? Well, big life events like divorce, change in relationship that's close to you of any kind, death in the family of someone that's very close to you also, moving. Sometimes you literally get sick. You have a health challenge that's very stressful. You can have things like loss of a job that you didn't expect. Or let's say you can have happy stresses too, like you get married. I remember when I was getting married, I love my in-laws, I love my family, but oh my word, this was not an easy time. So you're dealing with all the people and you're having a lot of fun. And I collapsed. I remember after the wedding, on the airplane, I literally vomited for like 5 hours. It was all too much. So that was not a burnout, but it was definitely a reaction, a stress reaction. So watch yourself. How do you handle stress? What are you doing for yourself? How are you taking care of yourself? Let's talk a little bit now about how stress affects our physical body. It's very powerful. Remember all that input, all that data we're putting in, all that, let's say, energy that's getting stuck. Let's look at that. Basically, stress has a very much biological mechanism, which is a physiological reaction. So the minute the body senses that something could be dangerous or that something is too much in the system, it has a way of handling that. So when we perceive that something's dangerous, our body gets information to run, to fight or flight. So this could also be in a relationship. You can also be having a major fight with your friend or your husband or your wife or whoever, and you could, in your system gets this like danger. And so what happens is it stimulates a part of the brain called the amygdala. And this is sort of an old part of our brain. It's a reptilian, kind of a very animal reaction. And what it tells our body to do is to run. And so all our blood goes to our arms and our legs because we have to run. We have to, get going. But the problem is the blood goes away from our head and our guts. And that's what happens to be a problem over time, because if we are chronically stressed and we're sitting at a desk and we're just working, but we feel that same stress response and we're stimulating this fight or flight, guess what's happening? We're initiating a whole cascade of physiological responses in the body that release certain hormones that make us want to run, and we don't run. And you know what it else does? It releases sugar into our bloodstream because When you need to run, you need sugar, right? So a lot of times this initiates this need for food cravings. So people in these stress moments, they eat whatever's near them because they feel it. They feel like they need to. It's like our bodies are constantly talking to us, and we're in this state, the body's saying, eat more sugar so you can run. Well, the problem is you're not running. You're actually sitting behind a desk. So guess what happens? That all turns to fat. And unfortunately, that's a problem because over time, that tends to be the kind of fat in the middle of our bodies that can cause so much damage and health issues. So this is what happens. When it stimulates, when the amygdala is stimulated, it sends a kind of signal to the adrenals. And the adrenals release a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol is the hormone responsible for putting out all that sugar and sending messages to run. And when we're in that high alert state, the problem is we're not allowing our body to rest. Now, cortisol is very interesting because over time, that's when we see with chronic stress the problems. Not only of, that you gain just a little weight, but you can gain a lot of weight. You can become totally jittery and overwhelmed in your whole body. And this eventually affects your mind and your spirit because you feel kind of like exhausted about life. You might even feel like you can't go on anymore. Like, oh, life is too much. And we see this a lot. I see this in my work with people all the time that I coach. So one of the things all over the world is we have a big problem with global obesity. And this is really a problem of stress. It's also a problem of the food, and we'll get into that at another time. But for sure, stress is a major factor. When we're in life and we're just having our stories and things happen, and when things are happening at a very fast pace, and let's say one of those crisis periods happens, and we haven't been taking good care of ourselves till that point. Well, the tipping point can be when those crises hit, because then they just propel us over the edge. And what does that look like? Well, what happens then is you get a huge threat to the system. And the system, these threats are related to belief systems and emotions about things. And these emotions are very powerful. But at the time of the events, we actually don't have time to process things. It's sort of like our bodies have been told to run and survive. So during these survival moments, we don't have time to digest and rest and really figure out why we had those feelings, how we can get rid of them and let them go. So let's say we're having a huge fight with somebody, maybe someone we work with, and it's just terrible. Well, at the time that the breakup's happening, it's just really reactive, isn't it? It's just, it's awful. But we have a lot of emotions, and we might even feel really bad about ourselves or feel bad or angry at the other person. But at that time, we really, usually, if we're not very conscious, we have a hard time to process this. So we need help with this. Now our system has two parts. One is the sympathetic system that is like stress, run, get going, and the other part is this parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. Well, when we're never in rest and digest and we're always in the other, then eventually the system breaks down. So we need to help ourselves to recognize when we're near that, to be able to develop coping strategies throughout our life that we can be more in rest and digest. We need to choose that. And what does that look like? Let's look at that. So one of the things about resting and digesting is learning to declutter the mind. See, when the mind is full, just like a computer that's overwhelmed and overloaded with data, that's what our mind becomes. It gets overloaded with data. When we haven't decluttered the brain, then the brain is vulnerable and affects the entire body. The other issue is that when we don't rest and digest, we can't process these emotions. And these emotions get stuck in our system like huge energetic blocks. They're real. It's like me carrying weights. And I just start adding a weight for every emotion that I didn't digest. So after a while, I'm carrying these huge bags of weights everywhere with me, these huge bag of weights, and I can't even move anymore. Well, that's exactly what happens. Now, one of the things that happens also is that as we're having this chronic stress, and it goes on, we're affecting our cells. And this is the new science of epigenetics. It's teaching us that our cells are reacting to everything we think, everything we feel, and everything we do. Isn't that amazing? They're so powerful, and we're so powerful because what we do affects our very core. So epigenetics is telling us that we have choices, and how we live and what we do really affects which genes that we carry will get turned on or turned off. So what are the side effects of stress? Well, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, fatigue, like totally exhaustion where you can't go anymore, like chronic fatigue, diabetes, too much, you gain weight and you can get diabetes, heart disease, alcoholism. Why would you think like drug addiction and alcoholism would have anything to do with this? Because what people do to rest and digest, because they can't get into that mode, they take drugs and take alcohol because that calms the system. So, coffee ramps us up and alcohol brings us down. So many people get in the pattern of doing that all day long, and that's actually not helping very much. Gastrointestinal problems, because we can't actually digest our food when we're constantly running, can we? We do, but we don't do a good job of it. Alzheimer's actually has been linked to too much stress. What is all that clutter of the mind doing to our brains after all? And it increases aging. So let's take a look at some things we can do to live healthier and de-stress. So some of the things I've learned to do to combat stress, because I definitely am the type for it, sorry to say. I've learned to meditate, which I thought was going to be really hard, but for me, I loved it. The first time I ever learned how to do it, it made such a difference. So there are so many apps for meditation. There's so many ways to meditate today. In my day, when I learned it, there weren't very many. And I was lucky that I found it. And it made a tremendous difference. Sleeping. We have to make sure that we get about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Now that isn't always easy when you're stressed. And sometimes you're going to need to get help. Maybe ask help from a practitioner or someone who knows a lot about stress release. Sometimes we do need help with this, especially if we're not sleeping, or a doctor, to seek a doctor or a medical attention. Walking in nature was very helpful for me. It was less helpful to run. When I was going to the gym all the time, it helped a little, but it kind of made it more stressy, even getting there. But of course, exercise is brilliant. It helps to release stress. It's been proven. And you have to find the right exercise for you. That's always very interesting. And maybe a combination. So sometimes when you have a little more energy, you could do a little more aerobic. And when you need to rest, maybe more yoga or something calming. But what I have learned about exercise is that you have to look inside and feel what you need to do at the time. And you have to make it a habit. And if you don't make it a habit, that's also difficult because then you're not going to do it. And that's always so interesting. So we need to have a habit of some kind of regular exercise, and that often helps also with stress and with sleep. Now, another thing that I have learned, and I do it all the time, is when I recognize that I'm really having this moment. Maybe I'm even in an argument with my husband. Well, don't say that. I don't want to talk about that. No, usually we get along really well. But sometimes we do have these arguments. And then I'm really like, oh, well, what I do is I take a deep breath. And it really makes the energy change. So take a deep breath. when you're really noticing that you're getting worked up and you can feel the difference. That I have really learned. Now, massage helps me also, and I know other people like all kinds of therapies, but massage I love because the muscles actually over days and days and days get very stressy, and then that really helps, especially if I've been doing exercise, to help release the muscles. I think the most important thing that I've learned also in the last 20 years is how to eat better. See, as a nurse, we're not really given much information about nutrition, that's sad to say. And often we work these really long hours and we would eat terrible things in the middle of the night just to get through, 5 cups of coffee or whatever we did to survive. I'm sure I'm speaking to someone out there because that was me. So learning how to eat better, it's not easy, but it's necessary in this time. And I'm not going to, we're never going to tell you there's one way to eat, but we're going to share over the course of the next months things I've come to know and other practitioners know what really helps to do sometimes, most of the time actually. And then sometimes you have fun and do the things you love to do. That's always working better. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about this month as we meet our practitioner in a couple weeks, we're going to talk about how powerful it is not only to declutter the brain with meditation and exercise and all the things, sleep we've discussed, but also sometimes our thought patterns are kind of holding us down and also stressing us out because we're thinking the same thoughts and we're getting the same reactions and things happening in our life because we're thinking the same thoughts. So in order to change that, we need to investigate, and sometimes we need help and coaching for that, to investigate really what is in our subconscious. What are those thoughts that are beneath the surface in our physical experience that are really driving our creative process? And a lot of people, unfortunately, will be surprised to know that the subconscious is very powerful. In fact, it's responsible for most of what is coming in our life, which is crazy, but it really is true. So the subconscious might need to be reprogrammed. And there are many ways to do that. And in a couple weeks, we meet a therapist who does that and will bring you information that I think will find very valuable. I'd like to thank you today for tuning in as we have been exploring what stress is and what we can do about it to live a better quality of life. I'd love you to subscribe. It's great to have you join and follow us as we explore more topics in the coming months.